me know visible for you guys.
Yep. We have started the recording now. Satya, over to you. Yeah.
Thanks. Welcome everyone. Welcome to D365 UG India Group. We are in session 54 today, unlocking the power of MCP server with D365 Finance and Operation. Today our speaker will be Brendan Breed. Before I hand over to Brendan, would like to give a quick introduction of our group. So our group is D365 UG India, where we basically connect, learn, and grow together. You can connect with us if you're not already connected on LinkedIn, Twitter, or YouTube, where 3,300 other members have joined us globally, and we are growing every day. Today, you can see in our session as well, we have our founding member Rachit Garg, Umesh Pandit, myself, and Deepak Agrawal. So just some disclaimer before we start. Apology, I have to say these disclaimers. This is our protocol. So views expressed are from the speakers and do not represent views from their employers or Microsoft. Contoso demo data and lab environments are used in these sessions. So no client data or no personal data is shared here of anyone. Any recommendation coming out of session should not be applied to production environment directly. I'm sure you will not. And these should be tested in a sandbox environment. The sessions will be recorded on MS Teams. And if you do not consent to be part of the recorded session, then this is a good time to disconnect. So if you are connected with us already, you must be following us on YouTube. You can see all the videos we record here are posted on YouTube. So if you have missed any session, you can go YouTube and catch up with our sessions. Okay, so today's session, so MCP server. If you haven't heard about MCP server in last 2 weeks, I'm sure you must be living under the rock somewhere. Whenever you wake up in the morning, you open LinkedIn and first thing you see is the MCP. So MCP with D365 or MCP with any other platform. So MCP is the buzzword nowadays. There are a lot of questions in my mind at least. What is MCP and what MCP can do and what is the maximum capability of MCP? So I'm sure we'll all be asking some of the questions. So yeah, handing over to Brendan. Brendan, maybe give a quick introduction of yourself and then start the exciting session.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Satya. What I might do is I might just start by sharing my screen.
Sure.
Let me know as soon as you can see it. And yeah, thank you so much for inviting me to talk about a burning hot topic at the moment. Okay, that screen share coming through?
Yep.
Perfect. So I won't spend a lot of time on the introductions because I would like to use as much of the session to demo the capabilities to give everybody a good idea on where we're going. But yeah, I work for a company called Next365. I head up the technology side here in Australia. Our company operates in North America, Europe, and Australia, with various different offices located in all of those countries. Then what we do, we specialize in advisory services on D365. We work very closely with customers and partners. So we are positioned as a third party that provides support to sort of both ends and provide an independent view on a lot of these projects. So we're in the very fortunate position that we're able to work with a lot of talented individuals on the partner side, but also on the customer as well. So let's jump into understanding the new D365 ERP MCP server. And I sort of created this little agenda just to keep us on track, but I'll try and move through the theoretical components as quickly as possible. I do think that it's very important, though, to understand a lot of these concepts because they help inform our thinking behind how we use the tool. So,
Brandon, excuse me. You're sharing the right screen, right? Like,
yeah, it's the PowerPoint. Yeah, I'm not going to go into presentation mode for this
okay,
because
sure.
it's not quite necessary.
Yeah, that's fine.
But the first thing we need to talk to is just an introduction to AI systems and the type of systems, right? So if you haven't done a lot of research on these systems, a very important differentiation that you need to make between AI-based systems and traditional systems is that you get deterministic systems and what we call stochastic systems. Now, if you haven't heard these words before, don't worry. It's generally used in a lot of math problems, but it translates very well into information systems as well. When we talk about deterministic systems, it's systems where we can determine the state based on the current state, always, and in the same way. So if you have certain inputs, you can always predict what the output is going to be. D365 Finance and Supply Chain is a perfect example of this, right? If we configure something in a specific way, we know that that configuration should lead to a deterministic outcome. And that's very important, especially for information systems that use a transactional or accounting-based engine. They have to be deterministic because if they're not, you cannot trust the financials that are effectively coming out of the system and that organizations rely upon. So the next type of system that you get within AI systems is what we call stochastic systems. And these are systems that evolve over time and are generally random, meaning that the output is based on a probability distribution, which means that when we put an input in, we sort of have an idea what the output is going to be, but we don't actually know what it's going to be until it happens. And when we use any system that makes use of a large language model, they are stochastic in nature. So when you see people talking about, oh, AI and LLMs are going to replace ERP, no, definitely not. It will never happen because ERP can't be run on stochastic systems, right? It has to be deterministic. Now, I'll go into some of the detail as well, but when we talk about using stochastic systems, we're talking about using stochastic systems to interact with the ERP, not replace it, which is a very important distinction to make. We're using stochastic systems to interact with the ERP. There are various different articles that you can read up on if you've got a lot of time. There's a lot of very smart people writing research articles about these sort of behaviors, but in principle, these two things are really important to understand before we start. Now, what is MCP, right? So Model Context Protocol is a standard that was created to help AI applications connect to external systems, whatever those systems might be, right? It could be data action related, whatever the sort of interaction is. The MCP provides effectively a set of tools, and those tools are then used by the LLM and the agent to perform various different tasks. So the types of tools that we get within the D365 ERP is there's three different types, right? So data, form, and action. So form actually mimics the behavior of the user. So it spins up a session in the background and it mimics the behavior of the user. And you can do anything with the MCP that a user should or can do, right? Secondly, you've got data tools for large data style operations, lookups, pushes. It supports all of the standard create, read, update, delete functions that you would get out of OData within D365. And then you've got action tools, right? And these are really flexible tools because effectively it looks up different classes, functions, and APIs, and you can interact directly with those with the business logic within the application, right? So across those three different tool stacks, you get different scenarios where you can do almost anything within the application. And this is specifically, sorry, just for context, we're talking specifically about the D365 Finance and Supply Chain MCP. There are other MCPs as well. There's an MCP for Business Central and for the broader D365 stack, but they behave slightly differently. But the Business Central MCP, for example, manages security slightly differently because you can define what tool sets are available in the Business Central MCP, whereas in the FinOps one, that feature is not available yet. Okay, and then security considerations, right? So when we look at using a stochastic system, we need to think very carefully of how we use that system. Is it a production or non-production use case? If it's production, there is obviously a level of caution, governance, and constraints that need to be applied. If it's non-production, you can be more free. And when it comes to security, this is very important. When you use the MCP server, there's two clients you can use. And effectively, what those clients do is they authenticate using the user session, and they inherit the security roles that have been applied to the user session, which in a non-production use case is great because you can play around with the MCP and do whatever you want. But because the MCP is stochastic in nature and somewhat unpredictable, in a production use case, that becomes a little bit more difficult to deal with. At the moment, there's no way to determine a second level of security on the MCP server for production use cases, though the issue has been raised and the Microsoft engineering teams are looking at the issue to determine if there's a possible solution. So I think it's very important when we do talk about these MCP use cases that you differentiate between a potential production and non-production use case. Microsoft does recommend that you do look at certain production use cases for clients, obviously making sure that it is safe to use. There are clients that have used the MCP already. There's been some very creative use cases. But again, I think an element of caution and restraint needs to be applied when it comes to production systems. When you do look at these use cases as well, the best place to start is to have a look at high value, low complexity use cases. Right? So if you're talking to customers about MCP use cases, look at something that will deliver high value, but is low in complexity. That's where you want to start. A lot of the times, there's high value, high complexity use cases. The challenge with that is it's very hard to get right. And you risk sort of damaging confidence in the tool and software if you don't get it right. So you know, have those conversations with your customers, start thinking about what the potential use cases can be using the MCP. Okay, so getting started. So I mentioned previously, I'm not going to go through setup guides in the session. We don't have enough time. There are really good setup guides by various different people. Andre, which you all should know from Dynamicspedia, is a wonderful guide on setting this up. Have a look at Dynamicspedia. All of the information is there, and I'll sort of guide you to some people who are working on this regularly and post regular updates on a lot of these features as well. Let me jump into a Copilot Studio demo, and let me show you what this looks like. So the first thing that you would need to do in Copilot Studio is make sure you're in the right environment. So here I've got a sandbox environment up and running. I am simply going to create a new agent. Again, I'm going to run through this relatively quickly because I want to get to the more advanced use cases where it gets very impressive. But I'll show you how easy it is to get an agent up and running. So this is a stock standard new agent, right? What we'll do is, so the first thing that you want to know is when you choose a model, the MCP generally works best with the Anthropic models. The reasoning components behind them are really strong, and they do work really well with the Anthropic cloud models. So if you are trying it out the first time, make sure you sort of try it out with these, either Sonnet or Opus. Opus is the most comprehensive. Sonnet is also really strong to use and a bit faster as well. So let's say, for example, we choose Opus. Whilst this updates, we're going to navigate to the Tools section over here. We're going to click on Add a Tool. And then what we're going to do is we're going to filter on the Model Context Protocol section here. And we're going to look for the Dynamics 365 ERP MCP. So I'm going to connect the D365 Dynamics ERP here. You'll see it inherits my username connection over there. There are a couple of setup steps that you need to do in order to get this enabled. You need to have a 46 or a .46 or .47 environment up and running, and you need to enable the D365 ERP MCP feature, as well as enable Copilot Studio and Visual Studio as clients in the instance. Okay, so once this tool has been added, we're going to go to additional details, and here we're simply going to say, in my D365 environment, let's start a new session here, log in to that environment, company USMF. And that's about as much as we need in order to get going. So if you scroll down, you can see some of the tools that are available here. You can see that there is a plan, at least at some point in future, to enable and disable certain tool sets. However, there will still be challenges with that because they won't necessarily apply a layer of security between read and write or delete. So once this is done, I can click on Save, and then I can simply ask the agent to do something. So let's see, please provide my top 10 customers in USMF. So this is just authenticating the first time. So what this does is it effectively stores my session. Now there is a way to set this agent up to use the creator credentials as well. But generally speaking, we would expect that the user credentials would be passed on when the agent interaction happens. On the left-hand side, you can just see what's happening from a logic perspective, which tools it's calling within the D365 ERP MCP. You can debug this if you do get things wrong as well. So there's a lot of information that it does provide within this content table if you are curious about how it operates. But effectively, it's going to process and reason what it needs to do. You can see that I haven't given it an indication on what to do at all. It's a stock standard agent just using a deep reasoning model. So based on that, it's going to return a result for me. And this is where demoing these kinds of scenarios is really interesting, because if you ever thought that demos are temperamental by nature, try doing it with stochastic systems, because you never know what the system is going to do. So it's very interesting working with these systems. Now, there are ways to obviously make it more deterministic. The way you set up the agent and the amount of context that you give the agent makes it better, right? And it can make it faster, as well as knowledge sources and things that you can add in order to improve the behavior of the agent. But here we can see that it's given me my top 10 customers, total invoice amounts per customer, and it's given me some key observations based on insights that it's developed. Another thing that I do want to stress as well is that stochastic systems are not good at deterministic tasks, right? So math as a deterministic task is something they're really bad at. So if you're going to ask it to parse or perform math in the agent layer at the moment, you will get mixed results. There are people working on a potential solution to do aggregation in sort of the SQL layer. So there are people looking at potentially changing the way that aggregation happens to make it more reliable. But again, when you do look at production use cases and you've got finance people counting on figures, and specifically aggregated figures to be correct, that's something to be very mindful for. But overall, it does very well. I can also be more specific, right? So I can say, let's say, for example, for this specific customer, can you identify if the customer has any outstanding invoices, right? So I can ask things like that. I can ask things about settlement that it does really well. If there's large data sets you need to search through, it performs really well with sort of tasks that are very tedious and very difficult for a lot of people to do. Now, when you do perform certain deep reasoning tasks as well, it can determine, for example, if there is an issue, and it self-resolves the issue as well. So I've used a scenario prior in a company that I set up very specifically, where I've asked it to perform an intercompany journal, but I failed to set up the intercompany posting profiles, and I've also failed to set up the currency exchange rates between the two companies. At that point in time, it was smart enough to identify the issue, set up the posting profiles based on prior companies, create the necessary main account and set up the posting profile, and then navigate into the exchange rates, create the exchange rate type, add the currencies, and look up what the exchange rate was. And once done, it went back into the journal and processed the journal. So the deep reasoning models are truly impressive when it comes to resolving tasks. But in the same breath, they can also be very inconsistent. Okay, so this is probably the easiest way to get into it if you're new. It's very easy to get set up, right? Follow the guides. As I said, look at Dynamicspedia. There are some wonderfully detailed guides on how to get this all set up, what all of the prerequisites are, what to do step by step. And then logging into Copilot Studio and getting an agent set up and running like this is very easy. Like you've seen that it took us less than a minute to set up, and you can start playing around with it. Once you started getting into this, you can move into knowledge bases, right? And you can start adding various different knowledge sources. You can also look at including multiple different MCP tools, right? So for example, here, I can add either custom MCP tools, or I can combine this with something like Microsoft Learn. So when I add something like Microsoft Learn, I can say to the agent, use Microsoft Learn to determine what the process is that I want you to follow, and then execute based on those steps. So those are various different things we can do to make it more deterministic. You can also use Microsoft Learn to build up certain knowledge bases. So if you need knowledge bases stored within the agent that it needs to reference, you can use Microsoft Learn to do that. So I'll use an example. So let's say, look at Microsoft best practice guidelines for general ledger configuration, right? And what it would do is sorry, let me just, I'm just going to connect the MCP tool because it does need to authenticate. There we go. So you'll see every single MCP uses credentials to log in and authenticate. There we go. Okay, and now we can retry, and that should work. So now you can see it accesses the Microsoft Learn repository, and it's going to return best practice guidelines for what we need to do for general ledger configuration. So you can start playing around with combining multiple different MCPs, play around with building out knowledge bases, and then also perform more and more complex tasks in the application using a combination of those. Okay. Now, the next part, I'm not going to get into. You can build relatively advanced agents in Copilot Studio. The next step, after you sort of refined your agent, because you'll find here that I haven't even provided a description or instructions or anything that defines the behavior of the agent, right? And this is the type of output that I get. Generally speaking, you would always want to provide a really good description, knowledge bases, triggers, if it's applicable, connected to other agents so you can perform multi-agent workflows. And sort of customize the behavior of the agent as well, right? So there's a lot you can do within Copilot Studio alone. Don't feel like you need to directly jump into VS Code or start looking at Foundry and all of those resources. Like if you're new to this, there's a lot you can learn and get to do within Copilot Studio alone. Now, I think what I'll move to next is sort of the next step in the process, right? So when you get into a little bit more advanced use cases, right, you can start working in VS Code. I'll sort of explain how this works as well, but there are guidelines, there are guides online on how to set this up and how to get started. But for some more advanced use cases, again, we're going to look at a non-production use case here, right? And the reason why we're looking at a non-production use case is, generally speaking, the more advanced your framework is going to be, the more privileged it is, and the more risk it has to impact production. And when we look at non-production activities, right, there's still a lot of really valuable non-production activities. configuration is one of them, right? So let's say, for example, you are either looking at developing a new module or you're asked to spin up a new legal entity. There are non-production use cases where you can build up a configuration that'll help you speed up the process. Now, I do need to give a big shout out to Frederick here. I'll link his details. If you don't know who Frederick is, I'll link his details in at some point in the session at the end. Connect with him on LinkedIn. He's built the majority of what I'm going to show you today. I've added a couple of my own components into it, but he's built the majority of this demo. He's also very active on LinkedIn, and he's got some really valuable insights in the sort of vibe coding, D365 MCP space. Okay, so now we're jumping into the more interesting use cases. So let me move one of my windows over. So we've got roughly 20 minutes to do this. So this is going to be a real rush, but I'll try and explain as much as I can. So here we have Visual Studio code, and I have it connected into GitHub Copilot, and I've got a Pro Plus description here, subscription here. What this allows me to do is build up a repository and then interact with that repository using my agent here with GitHub Copilot. GitHub Copilot uses all of the same modules that we'll use in Copilot Studio. So nothing really changes from that perspective. The difference being is that we now have a whole bunch of knowledge sources that will help us effectively automate a lot of what we're doing. Now, this is either going to go really well or really poorly. We don't know because it's a stochastic system, right? So again, when it comes to reliability, these things are, it's hard to predict how they're going to behave. And to sort of prove that point, I've set up two instances here. They are basically identical in nature. And what I've done is I've asked it to create a prompt for me that I'll query later on to build a fit gap analysis dashboard. Now, you'll see in my example here, the one is called D365 User Group India Demo 2, and one is called User Group India Demo 3. I've given it the exact same prompt. It's built on the exact same repository. It's using the exact same model. Yet, the output of the prompts are vastly different. They're both fit gap dashboards, but they're both very, very different, right? So this is a perfect indication of what a stochastic system is and does. It will never be particularly consistent. That doesn't mean that the output is going to be invalid. It's just that it might not be repeatable. So yes, I haven't been watching questions, but I'm happy to take on questions as well and answer them. I might run through them at the end of the session because I do want to show some of the power of what the tool is doing. So in these instances, I'll start with this one, right? So the way this works is I have a requirements file over here. These files could be as large as I want them to be. They could be in any real format. The only thing I've done here is I have optimized the file to be quickly readable, right? So what I'm going to do is I have, and again, if you follow Frederick, he has a blog post up that explains how all of this works, right? So you can have a look at it. It's publicly available. Nothing that I'm showing you here, or mostly everything I'm showing you here is publicly available. So let's start, right? So I'm going to start the project, and I'm going to say I've uploaded my requirements file. Let's start the project, right? And I have various different instructions defined on how it needs to behave. So I have a core file that indicates exactly what it needs to do. And it's going to read through all of this to build up context. And then it's going to use that context to interact with the deep reasoning LLM. And it's going to perform different tasks that we've asked it to perform in this section, right? Whilst we're doing that, so I know it might be really small for people to see as well. So if you are in Teams, try and zoom in if you can. If you look at the MCP connectors that I've got here, so effectively this is how we define the MCP connectors in Visual Studio. Very easy. It's literally 2 lines for finance and operations, right? Very easy to set up. In this instance, what I've done is I've linked Learn and Docs, and then I've also linked an Azure DevOps MCP. Now, it's really interesting with the Azure DevOps MCP is that it is generally really good at interacting with Azure DevOps, though I haven't been able to get it to create a project, which I'm not sure if it's a tool set limitation or whether it's something wrong with my setup, but that's just something to note. So what you can see what it does now is it's gone and analyzed the requirements file. And again, if you look at what Frederick does, it doesn't need to be in a specific format. It generally has the capability to parse certain amounts of data regardless of what the format is. It is better at parsing certain formats over others. In this instance, what I'm using is I'm using a text file called a markdown file. It's a very lightweight file that has indexes and references that you can use to sort of quickly navigate through the content. So what it's doing is it is looking at the requirements, and I've asked it to perform a fit gap based on the requirements. Now it's creating a structured requirements matrix JSON file, which is in line with the Microsoft Business Process Catalog. And this is a little bit scaled down, but it's also in line with the Microsoft Best Practice Implementation Guidelines. Now, once this is done, it might ask me to continue 1 or 2 processes. And we'll see how quickly we can get through this. But the next step is going to be, it's going to go into Azure DevOps, create all of the different epics, features, tasks for us. And now it's going to build the configuration files for us to then push into the application. So whilst we're sort of waiting for this, I might take the time to see if there's any questions that we might answer. So I'll scroll up. So the first question was around the top 10 customer use case. Yes, it uses standard data entities. You can call custom data entities as well. It does understand context, so it does work with any customizations. question around, can the MCP click tools access all of the forms with the same confidence, or are there any limitations? In earlier versions, there were a couple of limitations. It's really interesting. The D365 finance and supply chain or FinOps forms do a couple of really strange things for people because people are the primary users. But they seem to have fixed most of the issues associated to that. I'm not aware of anything that it can't do at the moment that a user can click through the form with. So if you tell it to, like, for example, create a DMF project with certain entities and upload the files, it can do that. The only limitation that you might have is applications that are executed on your local client. So examples of that would be the financial report writer tool and the workflow setup tools. Though you can export workflows in XML format and import them, it's just you won't be able to click through into those applications because they effectively run an executable on your local machine. And the MCP is limited to the form interaction of the session. Okay, let me see next. We have natively available in Copilot Studio. Yes. Yeah, there are certain licensing requirements. That's true. And your consumption is based on, your consumption is calculated based on those licenses. I believe if you have the appropriate Copilot licenses, it's not actually counting tokens at the moment. It's just all included in your licenses. I also don't think there are any hard limits at the moment in Copilot Studio, like you will find in cloud, in Anthropic's cloud ecosystem, and what you can see here in GitHub Copilot Pro. So what I'm showing you here is my effective usage of tokens. So I'm through 27% of my tokens here. So it actually counts the tokens, but I don't believe that the same has been implemented for Copilot Studio. That might change in future, but at the moment you can use it as much as your license allows. Custom entities exposed to MCP. Yep. Has anyone tried generating a trial balance using the MCP? So when I talked about MCPs doing math and aggregation and that being very bad, that's exactly a use case I was talking about, right? So it's not going to work reliably now. I was fortunate enough to speak to a couple of fast track engineers in the US a couple of weeks ago. They know that this is a problem, and I believe someone is looking into a potential solution where the aggregation happens on SQL side instead of on the MCP side, which means that the results will be way more reliable because the MCP would just be passing on and not calculating. Can we not give the prompt fit gap analysis or any DMF related from Copilot Studio? You can do this in Copilot Studio. The only reason why Visual Studio Code and GitHub Copilot is useful is speed and flexibility. It's just easier to build out the repository of things that you need in this tool. It's just a little bit faster. It's also, you are limited to some extent in Copilot Studio, like your knowledge bases are limited. You can only add a certain amount of files based on where you add them and how and the like. So which storage mechanism you use, etc. Like if you add them on SharePoint versus somewhere else. Whereas here, you're effectively running it off a local repository. So it just gives you a little bit more flexibility. Okay, so you can see that it is keeping up on the reasoning. It's at the moment, where are we? Yeah, so it's looking at the entity structures. It's now going to build the per module configuration summaries, right? And then once that's done, it's going to call the D365 MCP and execute. Let me see if I can, not sure if that's going to help speed it up. We'll just wait for this to run through. Again, I think a big problem that we do see with a lot of these types of solutions is that you have to manage the context window very well. If the context window explodes, your results seem to get worse and worse, and it takes longer and longer to process. So efficiency is a big is an important part of this, and then also again making sure consistency is there is a really important thing. So what you can see, what it's effectively doing here is what they would call a very basic RAG pattern, which means that it's retrieving data and writing data into a repository so that it can use it later on. So if you hear people talking about various different patterns as well, RAG is a very common one, and this is a perfect example of what a very basic RAG pattern is. There's also various different levels of maturity in terms of storing data and indexing data, but it gets very technical very quickly. Okay, so let's see. So what it's done is it's created various different config files here, so we can have a look at some of them and see what it's actually done. So this is a new file that it's created. So it's created the data area ID for the new legal entity. It's called I365, right? And that's the same as the entity name that we've defined here in the requirements file. And it's now going through all of the different core config components. And it's going to build out exactly a run sheet on what it needs to do. So it's smart enough to have a look at what the number sequences are that it needs to generate, the currencies, what are the DMF templates it's going to use. It builds quite a comprehensive structure here. Now, I've got to say as well, Frederick has done an amazing job to link up a very tidy knowledge base. If you don't have a knowledge base and instruction files set up and linked in a very clean way like this, again, you get inconsistent results at the best of times, and it also takes a very long time to process. Okay, and there we go. It's created the config summaries. Okay, so it's going to create the rest of the config summaries. Hopefully we don't have to wait too much longer. I'll give it, maybe I'll stop it here and I'll just ask it to execute what it's got. Please execute the configs that you have. Just to see if we can get some results out of this. So again, what you'll see is this is a perfect example of deep reasoning, right? So it's looking at my prompt, it's looking at the context of what's in the repository, and then it's going to execute what it thinks the best task is. So now it's recognized that it needs to use the D365 F&O MCP. It's validated the data. It's going to start with org admin. So we've got the prerequisites and the all of the different sequencing, and then it's going to effectively create it. And we can have a look in FinOps to make sure that it actually created. Okay, so there's a question about the time it took for top 10 customer results. Yes, so again, the less context we provide the agent, the longer it's going to take. So the more context you provide, the better the results. Question, how can we add custom X++ code APIs to ERP MCP? It will recognize the classes that you've created as part of the action toolset. So it doesn't really matter what what customizations there are. Obviously, within those customizations, if you do have descriptors and comments that make sense, it's easier for it to find it. If it's very nonsensical, then it's obviously going to have a hard time to find the right task to execute. And then Excel, yes, yeah, it supports. So it supports multimodal retrieval. So all of these sort of new top models have an element of multimodal retrieval built in. So you can give it PDFs, you can give it Excel files, Word files, even images to some extent, with more or less success. But it supports multimodal retrieval. Okay, so you can see what it's trying to do is it's trying to run certain OData queries. This is common as well. So sometimes you need to sort of tell it to, instead of using OData, use the form tools. It does. It should reason out though what the issue is and figure out on its own what it actually needs to do to complete. Question about technical design documents and expecting code for SSRS. Yep. So that there are a couple of people looking at the more technical coding side using AI. I don't think that's really applicable to the MCP at the moment, but there are people using cloud code and building, different X++ classes and functionality with various degrees of success. I'm following a couple of people that are doing it. I'll include them in the reference list post this session for anyone interested in the sort of technical side. Okay, so let me just see. So you can see it's struggling with dimension creation. So there are a lot of things that it does struggle with at times. Again, these things aren't insurmountable, but it's dependent on how much context you're providing it and what you need to actually tell it to do. It will eventually figure out what the solution is. So you can see that it's now pivoted to form click tool sets. It has come up with an issue as well on the filtering and pagination, but it'll sort of figure out what it needs to do. Sometimes it can run down a rabbit hole, an incorrect rabbit hole. More often than not, it's right, but it does at times struggle. So you can see that it's now creating the financial dimensions, and it's setting various different control values and saving the form. Now, I do think that whilst this is, we are running out of time, but let me log into finance and operations. We should be able to see, because I believe it's created the entity at least. So if we scroll down, we should see I365. There it is. So it has created the new legal entity. And it would have created things like the number sequences, and I believe it's busy with the general ledger setup. So we should be able to see some of the parameters completed already. It's still busy. But it'll effectively carry on and execute. Now, I think the last thing I wanted to show you, which is really, really nice, is that I'll stop this just because I do know we are running out of time. So the last thing that's really useful is I can ask it, please create documentation for the USMF company. Now, what this allows us to do is it effectively looks at, in this instance, it'll have a look at what the config is within the entity. And then it'll actually create, based on our prompts, a couple of reports for the specific entity. Let's see if it'll generate quickly. This is really impressive. If you have a look at the demo that Frederick does, he's able to get it to effectively build an entire HTML page that showcases all of the components of the configuration. It automatically builds things like fit gap and fit gap dashboards. It obviously integrates into DevOps if you've got the configuration set up correctly. And then it'll do things like showcase all of the distribution paths around the world for multi-entity global setups, which is really impressive to see. It also summarizes the progress of the project, where the configurations have been, what they've done, and sort of how everything's tracked as part of the project. So again, I would recommend everybody to have a look at what Frederick's done there. Let me see. It's having a look at the key configuration areas, and it should use that to then generate the report. So let's see. So it's identified all of the legal entities, the chart of accounts, all of the different components. Okay. Let me just have a look. Okay. And here you can see it is yeah, so it's going down the wrong path here as well, which is part of the problem with these systems. Let me see if I can get it to actually generate what we want. Let's see if that works. Another thing that you can do when you do interact with these systems, which is really powerful, is that the use of descriptive words matter. Using things like a quickly comprehensive is really important for these solutions because they do understand context based on those descriptors.
So basically prompt, right, Brendan?
Yeah, prompt engineering is super important. Like I can't stress it enough. I think it's very important. It's as important to write good prompts and descriptors for the agents as also overdoing it, right? Because you don't want to overdo it, because if you overdo it, you effectively fill up the context window with junk that you don't need. So finding that balance of writing good prompts is really important. You don't want it to be too basic. You don't want it to be overly complex. It just needs to be sort of somewhere in between, and that generally gives you the best results in these tools.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a graph. Okay, wonderful. We might be able to see it. So this is some of the sort of more impressive things that it does. Oh, it's a pity. What I'll do is let me just open this. I'll open this in Internet Explorer just to give you an idea. of the file that it's actually generated. It's still busy creating, sorry.
Yeah, it's very slow, right?
Yeah, and I'm actually, so to give you an idea, so I'm actually running fast mode, which gets billed at 30 times the normal rate. So I am nuking tokens to try and get these results out for you as quickly as possible. But yeah, let me have a look. At least I'm hoping at least I can show you the what the reports look like that you can generate. Let me see. Yeah, so this is an example of what it's actually done. So it's had a look at all of the different node categories, and then it's made a sort of an interactive link that you can play around with that showcases all of the dependencies and what it's done. That you can then look at to go, okay, well, how does inventory management interact with the general ledger? How does accounts payable and receivable and all of that sort of relate? Which I think is sort of is quite neat. There's obviously filter functionality, and this it creates this sort of on the fly. What I have seen with this as well is it's a little bit inconsistent in the format sometimes. Like sometimes it does a really good job, sometimes it does a less good job. But it generally speaking, it is very impressive. Let me just see if I can get the world map for you as well, because that is very useful to see.
It looks right because GL is in the center, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. Look, it's so this is a really good example. So in the requirements, I've actually told it where the distribution hubs are, where the supplier locations are, where everything is. So it's taken that information and it's visualized it onto a world map to show what your implementation is effectively doing.
Sorry guys, yeah, I'm telling all good.
So and then lastly, the last one I wanted to show you was the let's see here was the fit gap dashboard. There we go. And these are the types of things that you can do. So when it's analyzed the requirements file, it's understood and classified the different requirements. It's understood there's no intercompany requirements because I've told that it's only a single entity to try and make it a little bit faster. It's identified certain partial fits, right? And then it's also created what the requirements look like. So this would be a reflection of what it looks like within Azure DevOps as well. And it's sort of looked at, it's put some rationale and resolution logic in it as well to sort of give a full view of what the analysis looked like and what it actually did. And yeah, these, as I said, these dashboards come out sometimes with less and more data. Obviously, the better data you feed it, the better they are. The more specific you are with a prompt as well, the better they are. So if you're more specific about the layout of the dashboard, you tend to get more consistent results as well. But yeah, really cool technology. It's obviously very experimental, but there are definitely a lot of non-production use cases that we can apply this to. And yeah, I would urge anyone to start sort of playing around with it and getting used to it and see what they could use it for. And yeah, thanks, Satya. Sorry, I know I'm a little bit over, but that's sort of what I had to show.
I think it's fine, absolutely fine, because it was very impressive. What I think. Anybody has question for Brendan. Maybe we can spend a few more minutes. Yeah, I know there's a lot of content, a lot of impressive things many of you must have seen first time.
Great session, Brendan. Thanks for sharing your knowledge with us. I just have one question. So the Copilot Studio was connected through your user ID. So when you build the connection with the MCP server, you used your user ID.
Yes.
So if you are doing any CRUD operations, is it stamping your user ID, or is there a way to differentiate that this was done through a MCP server?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So there is a way to differentiate. You have two options when you set up the agent. There is an option for you to define how it authenticates. Now, you could, if you create let's say, for example, for the lack of a better term, an agent account, and you use that agent account to create the agent, and you set the setting to use the agent credentials, you could use the agent credentials to authenticate, even though a separate user interacts with the agent. The disadvantage of that is obviously the timestamps and the logs associated to what the agent is doing falls under the agent account and not the user account. Whereas if you use the user account as the primary form of authentication, then again, it inherits the security roles on the user account, and it is limited to what the user can do. And then if it executes something, it also executes as the user would, and that user's name and credentials get stamped against whatever the MCP server has done.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I think there's one question from Deepak. He has dropped due to a call, but I'll just ask on his behalf. The question is, in case of multiple production instances located in different geographies, how data will be processed at MCP considering local government policies like GDPR, etc.?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the MCP servers currently connect on a per instance basis. So it connects to the environment itself. So if you have multi-instances across geos, you would only be able to interact with a single instance per agent and MCP toolset. But you could always theoretically build multi-agent systems that work across geographies as well. It just becomes a more complex use case. So yeah, but the MCP toolset connects to a specific instance. It can't connect to multiple instances at the same time. But you could, like, for example, what you could do is if you have a user that is working across multiple different instances, you can set up 3 different agents connected to 3 different instances, and the user can interact with all 3. And those agents could potentially interact with one another as well. So yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else has any question? We know it's 12:10 a.m. for Brendan, so really appreciate the time you are taking out, Brendan, to interact with the community. But if anyone has anything, feel free to unmute and ask your question.
Hi, Rachit. Umesh this side would like to ask one question regarding the service principal connection. Do we have any kind of ability where we can configure the service principal connection instead of the end user credential at MCP?
So the only 2 options you have is again the maker, if they call it the maker user credential, and the user credential in Copilot Studio. Those are the only 2 options you have currently. So you could set up the maker credential to run, which would effectively be a separate account, right? But yeah, those are the only two options in Copilot Studio for connecting at the moment, at least.
Okay.
Yep. Any other question before we close the call?
Would like to ask one more question, Brendan. Do we have any kind of the reference where we can connect cloud hosted environment with the Copilot Studio?
That's a very
Just
good
for our
question.
curiosity.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
No,
I think there is documentation about it somewhere, but I haven't actually looked at it myself.
I think it's supported only for UDE environments if you are using development boxes, but the cloud hosted tier 1 are not supported with AI capabilities and especially this Copilot Studio experience. UDE, yes. CHE, no.
Okay. Just for information, currently kind of through the virtual entities, we are communicating with the cloud hosted environments, which will be communicated through UD environments only, the Dataverse entities, the virtual entity. So do we have direct connection where we can configure the CHE, and if we have, or if we have a workaround for that as well?
I don't think so. I think the sort of enablement of the feature is largely driven through PPAC. So the legacy environment setups might struggle because I actually don't think that you would have all of the components you need to make it to work. I could be wrong, but I suspect that anything that's not necessarily driven through PPAC deployments or sort of the new method of deployments may struggle.
Yeah, I mean, you can find some workarounds, Umesh, as you are saying, but as per official Microsoft documentation, if you have to use MCP server with F&O, you either use, especially for development boxes, then you have to use UDE infrastructure.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, thanks, Brendan, for the awesome session. So let's take, like, if I want to perform any CRUD operations through the agent. So I have, is the MCP server setup is enough, or like I have to have any Dataverse MCP, or is there any tool I have to install into the agent?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So yeah, so there's a bunch of different MCPs that you can obviously use, but as long as the entity is within finance and supply chain, you don't need a separate MCP to interact. The D365 ERP MCP is fine.
Okay, so I have to give the proper mandatory fields in the prompt, right? So that is quite enough.
Well, it'll realize, so it'll reason if you don't. It depends on sort of how much tokens you want to waste when you sort of work through it. It should reason through it. But again, like if you do set these things up, again, I would say that I've rushed through it quite a bit now just to try and get through time. But it's really important to define the behavior of what you want the agent to do properly. And it could be as simple as just adding the Microsoft documentation MCP server going, or just verify that you have all of the necessary mandatory fields defined. And it'll then look after that and then not execute the task before it's just done a quick test to ensure that it's all there. So those are small things that would just help save time and just help it not process as long.
Okay, Brendan. Yeah, thanks.
Brendan, I think we should close the session.
Yeah,
It's getting
no,
late for
perfect.
you, so
Yeah, no, that's okay. I'm really passionate about this, so thanks again for inviting
I know that,
me.
yeah. But I think people can email you or reach out to you on LinkedIn maybe if there are any further question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I might do a really quick shameless plug as well. So there's a couple of things just before we head off. Because this would be useful for everybody who's on this call. Okay, I'll share my screen one last time, Satya, just quickly.
Sure. Always.
So let me know as soon as you can see that.
Yep.
Okay, so again, please connect with me on LinkedIn. I have recently launched a new blog as well, so there will be a lot of resources on that blog website. If anybody wants to sign up, keep an eye on that. We'll implement some newsletter functionality at a later point, but you can access it through my profile on LinkedIn. Then really important people that if you're interested in this, people that you want to follow Andre, good colleague of mine. Everybody should know who he is. He's got some very valuable information. He's always very up to date. Follow Frederick. He is phenomenal. He's the mastermind behind the demo that I showed you. So, so again, please make sure you follow him. Sean, another really strong person when it comes to posting everything and all things AI. And then a local person here in Australia as well, if you want to follow that might not be as well known as the rest of them, but Ina Karp is wonderful as well. When we're looking at sort of AI, ERP, and vibe coding related sort of topics. So yeah, I just wanted to shout those people out. They're all very influential in the space. So if you're interested, feel free, follow them, have a look at what they're doing. It's certainly been very valuable for me. So yeah, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Brendan, once again, and thank you very much, everyone, from like wherever you're joining from. So this session is being recorded and will be put on YouTube very maybe tomorrow or day after. So please feel free to share or go through this again. I know everybody will go through this again. There's a lot of information and a lot of things to learn from here. Okay, so we'll close the session. Thanks, Brendan, and maybe we'll invite you again when there's more development, a lot of development happening here in this space.
I'd be happy to join. Thanks for having me, Satya. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
Brendan. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.